Nintendo leaks SNES CD specs. Sega touts the Genesis VR. And Mortal Kombat is coming to consoles. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time 40, 30 years ago to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. Today we're going to be traveling back 30 years to March of 1993. I'm your host Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Alex. Welcome back, Alex.
Hey, always good to be here, Carl.
Hey. So, obligatory banter. What have you been up to?
I mean, I appear so often these days that there's really not much to update you on anymore. I mean, I'm just kind of living my life, keeping on.
That is true. That is true. You truly have become everybody's favorite co-host. So, let's see. Have you seen the Mario movie yet?
I have not seen the Mario movie yet. Hopefully this coming weekend. I tend to wait a week or two to see movies. I just finally saw the D&D movie last weekend, so this weekend it'll probably be Mario time. Okay, so
as somebody who as a child and therefore does not get to the movies, please tell me, was it good, bad, indifferent?
I really liked it. I thought they did a great job. It is set in what is now the core D&D setting, what I used to know as the Forgotten Realms. And I'm a huge Forgotten Realms fan of that setting. So, I mean, they don't lean heavily on the setting, but when they say things like Waterdeep or Zolkir, it's like, I know what that is. So, I had the end lore perspective, which probably helps some getting acclimated. But I think even general audiences will enjoy just kind of the lighthearted, adventurous spirit. The characters are likable. The party is just a little bit janky in a way that you would expect a real D&D party to be. The stakes are just high enough without getting too ridiculous, and it tells a complete story. So I really enjoyed it.
Very cool. Okay, then that I consider from somebody with actual experience with this stuff to be a glowing review. I've heard similar. I had heard just today that it was set in the Forgotten Realms, which and I also heard there's like a brief background cameo of the cartoon characters at one point.
Yes, be on the lookout for that if you watched the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon back in the early 80s.
I love that.
They don't call attention to it, but they are there.
Well, there was a comic years ago where they hinted that they ended up there. Where it's like they're a little bit older and the sorcerer kid wants to apprentice under Elminster, so that would be cool. I'm guessing there's no Drizzt cameo any place to be found.
There is not. However, the movie's been successful. The creators have been saying publicly that they would love to do a sequel and feature Drizzt in that sequel. So, WotC/Hasbro, the ball is in your court now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. It would definitely raise the value of my old Forgotten Realms player's guide that actually has... I got Salvatore to sign the... I always call him Drizzt, but you're right, it's probably Drizzt. Yeah. The stats in there, I got Salvatore to sign that, so...
Awesome.
Come on, I want that. That thing's basically got to go up in value. Daddy needs some cash. Okay.
Sentimental value, Carl. These things
yes,
have sentimental value.
That's why I had to make it out to eBay.
Spoken like a true money-grubbing lawyer, Carl. Sentiment, what's that? That doesn't exist in that profession.
Hey. I take offense. We are not money grubbing. We are simply moral mercenaries.
I stand corrected.
Okay, so that being said, we've got the banter behind us now. Let's move on to the first point in our voyage today, which, well, we got to do something before that, which is the plugs. So everybody remember you can support the show on Patreon, follow us on all the social medias. All the links are in the show notes. We greatly would appreciate some nice comments from time to time. Just, let us know that we're not just talking to ourselves. And obviously, Alex's great work over at They Create Worlds, also in the show notes. If you're not already listening to him, but you are listening to me, I hate to break it to you. You're not listening to the better of the two. So, and he's laughing because he knows it's true. Now, let's
You're too kind. You're too kind.
So, before we turn on the time machine and head back to March of 1993, we need to first go to our first segment, the 7 Minutes in Heaven. The segment where our intrepid co-host must play a game that was reviewed in a publication dated March 1993 that they have never played before for 7 minutes. Now, we had a laundry list of interesting candidates this month. Everything from the Amiga classics, the Chaos Engine in Lionheart, the PC juggernaut Ultima Underworld 2. We had Dune 2, The Incredible Machine, Stunt Island from Disney Software, one of the many iterations thereof. Super NES classics like Tiny Toon Adventures. We even had Street Fighter 2 The Pinball as a contender with that nightmare-inducing backglass artwork of Chun-Li. If you haven't seen it before, just Google it. I had to look at it at arcades. You should have that punishment too. Lots of CD wonders like Lords of Thunder, the greatest soundtrack ever for a shoot 'em up. Road Avenger, and Catacomb Abyss. Catacomb Abyss, sorry, not the game I was just thinking of. We had a lot of interesting stuff, including also Wing Commander on both the Amiga and the Super NES. Take your pick of poisons on that one. Although the Super NES version is not that bad. It's actually playable. The Amiga version, on the other hand, well, that's a whole different ballgame.
I have only played that one on the PC, and I'm proud to say that I actually completed it and actually beat the whole game back in the day, which, for me, that's quite a feat. I'm not the world's greatest action gamer. No cheats or anything.
Well, I finished Wing Commander on the Amiga, on a bog standard Amiga, well, not bog standard, 1 meg Amiga 500 with dual disk drives. And thankfully there was a cheat code because, that slideshow would have been very, very difficult to get through otherwise.
I had the exact opposite problem, tangenting here, but that's what I do on my show, so now that's what we do on your show. But I had the complete opposite problem because I played Wing Commander. Wing Commander 3 was already out when I first played the original Wing Commander. So I had a Pentium computer that I was playing Wing Commander on. And Wing Commander is one of those games where it's like, we don't need to cap clock cycles. We're putting this on a state-of-the-art machine. Nobody's going to have a computer that runs it too fast anyway. Well, Pentiums ran a little too fast. So, blinding speed, impossible to play in the other direction. I did eventually get the utility Mo-Slow, but when I first bought the game, I didn't realize Mo-Slow existed, so instead I did something very, very horrible to my computer. That did not kill the computer in the long run. It survived. For whatever reason, with that computer, if you reboot it, if you hit reset while it was in the middle of its boot process, whatever process in there got corrupted, whatever cache didn't get cleared, it caused the computer to run very, very slowly at that point until you, of course, turned it off again. Then when you turned it off and turned it on normally, it was fine. So before I discovered Mo-Slow, to play Wing Commander, I would start booting up my computer, reset my computer in the middle of the boot up, and then let it completely load. And at that point, it was running slow enough that Wing Commander ran normally.
Wow. And see, kids, this is why you're a bunch of sniveling little spoiled brats, because this is what we had to do to play games.
That's right. Mo-Slow was a much better solution once I realized that existed.
And finally, I could have made you play Street Fighter II on the ZX Spectrum. Which, oh yeah, that's an experience that needs to have been had. But
Carl, I like you a lot. Under the right circumstances, I might even take a bullet for you. I will do many things for you. But one thing I will not do is play janky fighting game ports for you. No, sir.
Oh, come on. It's unique amongst its peers as one of the last major commercial products for the ZX Spectrum before some revitalizations 20 years later. But yeah, it's problematic is the best way to putting that game. Okay, enough of all that. We went with a true classic. One of the harbingers of the greatness of this studio as it would come. And when it was still not called what everybody knows it as today, the classic Silicon and Synapse, aka Blizzard game, The Lost Vikings. Are you ready, sir?
Let's do this thing.
Excellent. Welcome back, Alex, from your 7 minutes in heaven. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe The Lost Vikings based on your time with the game?
Well, based on my time with the game and my little bit of knowledge I had going in just by being a video game historian, The Lost Vikings is a delightful puzzle platformer, kind of like Lemmings if you only had 3 lemmings to control, but they all had to live to see the end. And has very intuitive controls, a wonderful in-game help system that gets you up to speed right away, and some truly boppin' tunes.
Very nice. And so, what kind of tasks? I mean, you compared it to Lemmings, which is interesting because Lemmings is still a very influential game at this point in time. And Lemmings 2 is actually getting reviewed in a lot of magazines this month. So, how would you distinguish Lemmings from this?
Well, it's basically as I said. I mean, instead of herding a bunch of different things towards a goal, you're only herding 3 things. Also, it is a little more actiony. I mean, Lemmings is a pure puzzle game. I mean, there's real-time decisioning that has to be made, but you're not slaying monsters and all of that kind of craziness as you go along. So, yeah, it's a puzzle platform game, and you have the 3 guys, each with 1 main ability, and you have to combine them in presumably ever more fiendishly complex ways. I didn't get that far in order to beat the levels. So definitely a good time if you're a fan of games of that era. It is well worth checking out.
Excellent. And it has really cool cartoony style graphics. The animation's fun. You didn't get a lot of it, but the deeper you get into it, the dialogues between the characters, especially at the end of levels when they're talking to one another, there's some real lulls in there. Some real belly busters. I caught myself several times. I've played through the game in the past, both this one and the sequel on the Super NES. And yeah, no, I had a great time with him. So And this is, I believe it's the last Silicon and Synapse game. The next two titles, Rock and Roll Racing and Blackthorn, are both going to be released under the Blizzard title, or Blizzard studio name. So, and they will then go on to bigger and greater things, and unfortunately, other than a Game Boy Advance release many years later, we won't see much more of the Vikings.
And one small cameo in World of Warcraft.
One small cameo in World of Warcraft, which, as somebody who has never actually played World of Warcraft, I missed out on, unfortunately. So, someday I'll catch up on MMOs, but yeah. Ultima Online was enough for me.
Fair enough.
Okay, so it's a recommendation. We've got 7 minutes in the can. Let's move on to everybody's favorite segment, the Department of Corrections, where our good friend Ethan will tell me everything that I got wrong in our February 1993 jump.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan.
Yay!
So, before we find out everything that I got wrong in February of 1993...
Hey, wait, hold on. Alex, come here. You have been summoned once again to the Department of Corrections.
I knew this didn't look like my office.
How do you like our latest decor?
Albuquerque?
Well, I mean, kind of a cross between a dungeon and Hawaii is not where I was expecting you to go, but I guess it is more in line with your brochures. So
yeah, we just had to put up a little bit of wallpaper and whatnot. You know, just to lighten the mood. There's no windows or anything, but a little artificial light will help ease the pain of the Department of Corrections this time around.
I can't tell. I can't tell. Are there 4 lights or are there 5 lights?
Oh, nice deep cut.
Not that deep, but anyways.
Okay, true.
Alex, my comment for you is. I can't remember the exact context of all this, but you mentioned the hot seat, and we need the hot seat 2.0.
Ah.
That is a necessary thing, which Norm needs to get on this very second.
I agree.
I have no idea anymore what the hell the context of that was.
It had something to do with a peripheral that I believe you said's the next hot seat.
Yes.
You know, we did those faux VR things that they were doing to consoles in the early 90s.
Yeah.
But this is the Department of Corrections for 1993, and the seats are not hot. In fact, they are very cold. There is only one man who deserves to be here. I'm sorry, Alex. You have to witness his fate.
Oh, no.
First up, this one, I'm surprised you didn't catch this, Alex, but Carl was calling the Apple II EA's lead platform, which it was never their lead platform, just because they did it for the Madden thing. Because of very extraneous circumstances, they were never developing specifically for the Apple II. In fact, I talked to one of the guys who was brought in as a porter of one of their Apple II their games to Apple II. They mainly started their lead platforms as the Atari 8-bit, and then later the Commodore 64, and then a little bit later the Amiga, and then they stopped that.
Gotcha.
Yep, that's fair.
Yeah. And for some reason, I always associate that first batch of software with the Apple II. But yeah, the Atari 8-bit would have been the better platform.
Yeah, I believe Hard Hat Mac was native Apple II game first. But I mean, the intent with the original wave was to target Atari 8-bit over Apple.
I mean, if you play 100%. Mule on anything else but an Atari 8-bit, then you're getting a bad experience. Well, the Commodore 64 version later is okay. But
it still doesn't have the 4 joystick ports. So
all right, that's true.
That did limit the game quite considerably. from its original intent. I think you could still play 4 players on the keyboard, but it's not the same as having, the 4 joystick ports.
Well, moving on.
Yes.
To mention VHSs, you said that they took 10 years to get to scale, but I don't know what your definition of to scale is, but around like 1985, the VHS players were about $400. So whether or not that counts in your high or your low range, I still don't think it necessarily counts as to scale.
Still $400 in 85?
Yep. I looked up some ads. That is about where it was.
That's insane. That's way more than I would have expected.
But, the thing is, there was, in terms of budget for an average American family, you would kind of be expecting to buy a new TV. And now that there were no new features in TVs, you just put that money towards a VHS or, a laser display if you're crazy. So that money that used to go into a new TV was put into VHS.
That's true.
That's very fair.
When does VHS first launch?
1976.
Okay. Yeah, but it's not the first video cassette recorder.
But Beta was only 74, right? I mean, it wasn't that
75
earlier. Yeah, it wasn't that
75. So that would have been the 10-year period. I think that's where I was thinking, because that's 74, 75 is when.
But do you still count that as reaching critical mass?
Well, as the start of that type of technology. I mean, the specific format, no. But then again, I mean, it would be kind of like home computers. At what point does the personal computer hit critical mass? I mean, you get the Trinity.
Well, I think I could say that.
The Trinity, gets the ball started, but then, you don't have your first million seller until the VIC-20. So, at what point do you have enough penetration in the market where you can say, okay, now there's going to be, software sales everywhere, for example. Because
e-machines.
E-machines, exactly. Well, I don't discount the e-machine as an extremely important step towards a certain type of computing, but because those things were ubiquitous for a while. But I guess my sensibility of it as somebody who remembers people with Beta machines, those were my first video cassettes that I remember watching stuff off of. That critical mass wasn't there until you get into the mid 80s, and suddenly there's video rental stores literally everywhere. When you could rent a VHS for the night from 7-Eleven, that was, for me, that meant there had to be enough machines out there for that extra support industry to actually flourish. So, yeah, I would say 85 is probably the point when VHS really takes off. Video cassette takes off. Whether or not it was VHS or Beta, I don't consider that to be a relevant difference, but that's just me.
I think that I still would say that it's probably a little later in terms of the mass amount of content that you could get on VHS. But regardless, we're not in the VHS room time machine.
That's true.
Okay, next up, into the rumor mill. Carl, I hate to break this to you. Quarterman is not a reliable source. Quarterman is the rumor mill of what is it? Game Pro that has printed many lies that continue to perpetuate on the internet.
But this was in the context of him not saying that he had anything concrete, just calling bullshit on Nintendo's claims of an imminent release of a CD-ROM drive, or the constant, now it's got this bonus feature. And it was just the latest example of virtually every editorial, if it was Video Games and Computer Entertainment, Electronic Gaming Monthly, Game Pro, all the editorials lambasted Nintendo with the same accusation of basically just trying to create a false narrative that you shouldn't be buying Sega CD add-on because we're going to make one in no time. And it was just the latest one, and I wanted to twist that knife a little bit more for you because you kept saying I was the only one who thought that. Everybody at the time thought it as well.
I'm going to have to support Carl here. You know, it's in this case because you'd never use it as a source, and I mean, of course, I'm with you 100% on that, Ethan. But in this case, it's not about the truth of the matter asserted. It's really about the context of the reporting, and I think it's a decent thing to report. But it is good of you to remind everyone that it is like speculation, zeitgeist, sign of the times, not this is actually the truth. So that part is a very good call out.
Yeah. And I didn't mean it as such, and I apologize to any listeners who thought that it was meant that way. But it's just to remind everybody, I'm not alone with this. And everybody at the time who was in the industry agreed.
Yes, everybody. Yes, that's why the majority of the reporting is rather uncritical. But, you know, we know how things shake out.
You need to stop reading
the
Nintendo
majority.
Power.
If you look at okay. Anyways, we're off on this fight again. It's going to. Alex is in the room. He's going to get his head cut off in the middle.
Gentlemen,
why do they have to keep fighting?
Gentlemen, you can't fight here. This is the corrections room.
And lastly, the Sonic the Hedgehog show, the one that later gets branded Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, did have 2 seasons, not just one. I can't remember how many Sat AM had, but I didn't watch either of them, so it doesn't really matter to me.
Same here.
Yeah. Ditto.
So that's the Department of Corrections for February 1993. We'll see you next time with more bloody confrontation. Alex, you are free to go ahead of us. We're going to have about a 10-minute staring match as you go.
I think I will skip that. Yes. So long, all.
Bye-bye.
See you later. And as always, Ethan, thank you for your service. Okay. We're good.
So I have to ask Carl, since I was booted out before the end, who won that staring contest?
Well, as we're going to see today, the argument may still be open, but I'm going to go with I still won that one. Still won it. Still won it.
Not going to let that CD-ROM go.
No, I'm not. Not until I get an interview with Gabaldi, okay? As soon as I get that interview, that and finally getting the manager of a computer land. Those are my 2 holy grails right now as far as interviews are concerned. So everybody out there, if you know how I can get either one of those interviews, please let me know. Because I desperately want one of those 2, if not both. And if you tell me that Gabaldi was the manager of a computer land, eureka! Okay. Okay, so let's move on and make some whole new mistakes by turning on the time machine and heading back to March of 1993.
Kid could point a gun at a television set.
Welcome back to March of 1993. Alex, what's our first story?
Japanese coin-up cabs go big.
The Japanese Amusement Machine Operators Union, or AOU, show was held in February and featured a lot of new games. The clear trend in the Japanese market is bigger cabs with highlights, such as 8-linked hydraulic Virtua racing cabs, the dual-seat steering wheel and handguns Extravaganza Lucky and Wild, and single-player flight sim Air Combat. That isn't to say that traditional games didn't get play, with new Neo Geo titles and a variety of fighting games also on show.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are really a couple of things going on here. First of all, of course, home games are getting more and more impressive all the time in terms of their graphics and their sound. And so companies are having to find different ways to distinguish coin-op games from what you can play in the home. And all of these fancy bells and whistles are one way to do that. But the other thing that's going on is this is really the Japanese arcade's Disney phase. The Japanese arcades at this point have been regulated as adult entertainment establishments, essentially, for just under a decade, since 1985. And throughout the late 80s and early 90s, they were trying to improve their image by refurbishing or opening new arcades that are brighter, larger, cleaner, better lit. And also, as the technology develops, trying to move into what you might call an amusement park, almost, except with video games instead of traditional carnival rides. You see Wonder Egg, of course, had opened the Namco facility, and you had a Joypolis on the way from Sega. And so having these big, almost more like rides in some ways than video games is definitely a big part of trying to move into this amusement park space where they might not get the same level of scorn or scrutiny as these establishments that need to be regulated so heavily.
Ah, okay. And we have talked about those attempts to Disney-fy this over the last year, and it does make sense. I mean, especially the Super Nintendo. I mean, once you get F-Zero on screen at home for essentially pennies in comparison with what you can do with what an arcade cabinet is costing, you have to go big. And we're right at this cusp. I mean, it's the Model 1 board from Sega doing Virtua Racing. We're going to get Virtua Fighter here pretty soon as well. But, you know, it's baby steps. We don't have fully textured 3D. I mean, if you're coming from the PC and you've just played Ultima Underworld, you're like, oh yeah, that's quaint that you got, you know, flat shaded polygons. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Yeah. And in that trend, also knowing that virtuality is also out there, you know, in the ether is interesting. So yeah, it's a very, very weird time. And just as a side note, I had to mention Lucky and Wild because I love that cabinet so much.
Yeah, I missed that one. I never played that one. I'm aware of it. I mean, I know what you're talking about with the awesome car and everything. I mean, it's really cool, but it's not one that I ever got to experience myself.
Oh, yeah, no, I got to play it only once in a proper arcade, and then I discovered that there was a little convenience store on the way from Tallahassee, where I was studying law, and where my parents lived in Gainesville, Florida. And I would stop there every time I was driving home and going back to play a round of Lucky and Wild. This would have been 2000, 2001 in that ballpark. So the game was already very old. That's why I was just sitting there. But it was a 2-seater steering wheel, 2 handguns mounted on the dashboard, and just a sprite scaling game. But so much fun. Just crazy, especially if you put enough coins in it and you were driving and you had both of the guns firing at the same time. It was great.
Absolutely.
Okay, but let's move on.
Absolutely. Speaking of big things, we have an absolute legend to talk about today as David C. Rockola passes away.
The founder of Rockola, a pioneer of jukeboxes and one of the most revolutionary figures in 20th century coin-op, has passed away.
That's right. He's the last of the titans that really founded what we would call the modern coin-operated manufacturing industry. I mean, it predated him. Coin-op and penny arcades and whatnot, they go back to the 19th century. But kind of when people today think of arcades and arcade games, they think of pinball, they think of the games that came out of the Depression, and that's kind of the chain of continuity. They think of the companies that were founded just before or just after the start of the Depression, like Gottlieb and Williams and Bally and all of these individuals. So of these titans, David Rockola was the last one. He got into the business in 1927.
Wow.
And was still, I mean, he'd ceded day-to-day control of his company, but he was still active with his Rockola manufacturing company in 1993 when he passed away, even though he had ceded day-to-day operations to his son. So, I mean, a true legend, a Canadian. He ran a cigar store until he realized that the slot machines on the counter, because back then in the 20s, gambling devices, trade stimulators, and slot machines and whatnot could be found in stores. Some places they weren't as heavily regulated everywhere yet. When he realized the slot machine at the store was making way more money for the operator than the cigars he was peddling, he moved first to Toronto and then to Chicago to get involved in the coin-op business. He founded Rockola under the name the Rockola Scale Company in 1927 to market a coin-operated scale. And then he moved into pinball in 1932. He created one of the most successful pinball games of all time, the game Jigsaw, released in 1933, which, according to reports, we don't have super accurate sales figures of 1930s games, but according to research and reports, it sold an astonishing 73,000 units, which, if those numbers are accurate, which I cannot speak to 100%, that would make it the most successful pinball game of all time by sales. Had another classic the next year called World Series that also sold a lot of units. As the decade moved on, became more closely associated with the emerging jukebox business, and they were never as big in the game side again. It's really Rockola jukeboxes were their big thing, though they did very briefly flirt with video games. In 1982-83, in the golden age when everybody had to get involved in video games, in coin-op or suffer, they released a very small number of very forgettable games, and then, of course, got the heck out once that market fell apart. So they weren't in for long. But
Gotcha.
that's kind of an overview of kind of what Rockola did in games and what Rockola did in coin-op. And, all the other pioneers from that time were dead by that time. Most of them died in the 70s. A few of them hung on to the 80s. None of the other early manufacturing titans made it to 1993. So this was truly the end of an era with Rockola's passing.
Yeah, and all of the magazines, the trade publications, paid homage to him. There was, I believe, Replay had like a 5 or 6 page spread on his life and career. It was fascinating reading. It really is. I mean, it's the last of that generation. He was in his 90s, and yeah, so well, the torch has been passed.
But enough about jukeboxes and records and pinballs and all of these primitive things, because now CES belongs to CD.
While cartridge gaming is still king on consoles, CD-ROM seemed to take center stage at the winter CES. A myriad of CD-enhanced versions of existing titles like talkie versions of Dune and Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, video sequence-enhanced versions of Kasparov's Gambit and Omar Sharif on Bridge, or new CD-only titles like Iron Helix and Star Wars Rebel Assault. CD console gaming also got a shot in the arm with more news about 3DO emerging and a growing number of Sega CD titles on display.
Oh, just listening to so many of those games takes me back because, of course, I was a teenager during this period when CD was just coming in a big way, and as myself and my friends or rather our parents were upgrading to new computers in roughly this time period, everybody was trying to push multimedia. Everyone was trying to push CD-ROM. And so there was so much game bundling going on with new computers. Get a CD-ROM drive to add to your computer, or buy a new computer that comes with a CD-ROM drive, and we will give you this bundle of games to show you how amazing your new CD-ROM system is. So I had a friend who had a bundle that included Dune, the French cryo Dune game, and Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. My computer, when we upgraded to our Pentium with a CD-ROM drive, it came with a CD-ROM LucasArts 3-pack that was Star Wars Rebel Assault, Fate of Atlantis, and Day of the Tentacle. So, yeah, I mean, when I think of this period, I definitely think of a lot of these games and the fact that these games have voices now. The characters are talking to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember this period as being one where I would look at my friends' computers, being the lowly Amiga 500 owner that I was, and would continue to be for several more years. And I do remember it was like, oh, this is what's happening now. This is a whole new world. And all those OEM packaging. I mean, last month we talked about how Virgin, publisher of Dune, had signed up.
Yep.
A few months before that, we'd already mentioned how Lucas Film Games, or LucasArts at this point, had also signed an OEM deal. And yeah, that bundling of software is going to continue for several more years to help justify the cost, because these things are still very, very expensive. We cannot overstate just how much this jump to a CD-ROM system was really going to cost you. And we're still talking single speed at this point. Nobody's really talking dual speeds in 1993 yet. Or at least not at the beginning of 93.
Right. And I got to tell you, I played both Dune and Dune 2 at this period of time as a kid. I played them both. And Dune 2 is the objectively superior game, but I really did love that janky, French, stylish, WTF, half David Lynch movie, half not David Lynch movie, half strategy game, half adventure game, Dune game. My friend and I, because it was his computer, we did play that thing through to completion and actually beat the game together. And it's weird. It's French. Practically synonyms when it comes to computer games. But, I have a soft spot in my heart for that game.
As somebody who completed it years later through the Sega CD version, which also had the video enhancements, I completely concur. I mean, the game is weird. The game is fickle. The game is almost unplayable without a walkthrough, and is very much a forerunner for everything else Cryo will do for the next 10 years until they go belly up, which we've already covered in a previous 20-year jump episode a year or two ago. And unfortunately, they will revisit this when they do another Dune game, Frank Herbert's Dune, which if you've played it, you remember, because some scars never heal.
Thankfully, I missed that one.
Oh, really? Oh, where Paul Atreides has a little green alien-looking pet that follows him around? Oh, yeah. I'm not making this up. It wasn't just a dream. This game was on shelves in a box.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, late era Cryo output is... There's no way to describe it. It makes David Lynch look sane. Okay, that's what they did. But okay.
Oh no. But moving on to other CD-ROM topics, it's time for Carl's favorite again. It's time for Ethan's favorite again, because the SNES CD-ROM specs have leaked.
Electronic Gaming Monthly reports that the Super NES CD-ROM drive specs were finalized in December to allow software production to begin. The 32-bit coprocessor running at 21 megahertz, and an additional CD-ROM decoder chip called HANDS. An extra 8 megabits of RAM will make the system run. Game disc will come in caddies equipped with lockout chips to prevent piracy. Oh, and the games will run on CDI, which would be interesting if CDI could do anything close to decent Mode 7 effects. Yeah, so
cross-licensing.
yeah. So now these are some specs. There is a diagram in here of the workflow structure, the chip structure, which is basically one-to-one with the Nintendo's technical conference that they held for developers in February, on February 1st, 1993. That document's also online. I've linked to it before. And again, everybody remember we're using cover dates of the magazines. So obviously the stuff was published a little bit before this, and also very importantly, all the links to the sources that we're talking about are in the show notes as well. So I've put a link to that document in the show notes. It's not very long. It's 17 pages, and virtually all of it is just a bare bones technical description of how a CD-ROM works, as opposed to actually giving any real insight into what these chips are, other than that it's a 32-bit coprocessor, whatever the hell that means. There's really no detail that a actual developer would be able to use to start developing anything. But that's another issue entirely. So the system that was originally supposed to be ready for December of 1991, then it was supposed to be ready for December of 1992, apparently didn't get finalized until December of 1992. So my money is still on. This is vaporware. They've seen the Sega CDs not going anywhere, but they still got to keep the pretense up that there might be something coming. Yeah.
I don't have a horse in this fight. That is between you, Ethan, and God, okay?
If I had to wager a bet, at this point they're just waiting to see, will people be willing to pay the extra cost of a Super FX enabled cartridge in order to play Star Fox? And if that's successful, we don't have to do an add-on. If that's not successful, we still have this other idea in the background, and we just basically soup up the Super FX chip and throw it in the cartridge, in the add-on. So, but that's,
I hear you. I hear you. But it's all the love is not reserved for little brother here. Big brother is still out there too, because Laseractive brings Laserdisc gaming home.
While we have discussed various attempts at bringing Laserdisc games to home gaming, ranging from makeshift ones like the type-in listings in Creative Computing and the adapter for running Dragon's Lair and Space Ace through an Amiga, Pioneer looks set to make Laserdisc games at home a reality with Laseractive. The device is a Laserdisc and CD player that can play standard Laserdisc movies as well as its own LD-ROM 2 formatted interactive discs. Through the addition of add-on boxes known as PACs, PACs, it will also be upgradable to full Genesis plus Sega CD or TurboGrafx plus CD unit or play karaoke discs. All for the low price of $970, without the packs, of course. And those are going to be cheap at just, $350 a pop.
Oh, is that all?
That's
all? Well, it's what a steal.
Yeah,
what a steal.
Especially considering that you can basically pick up a Genesis and a Sega CD for about the same price at this point. Yeah.
But can those play Dragon's Lair?
Well, Dragon's Lair's not out on the Sega CD yet, but it is coming. It's not going to look as pretty, but it is coming.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that they tried to do this. Obviously, it didn't go anywhere.
No, I think, I get this feeling at this moment And of course, we just mentioned 3DO is, sort of in the wings at CES. There's this feeling that the big home electronics companies need to be in this space. Philips is cutting deals. They got the CDI. Sony was trying to cut deals with Nintendo. They're working on the PlayStation. Pioneer is doing this. You've got Matsushita. Video gaming is big enough at this point that the big electronic companies want to get in there. But unlike previous technologies like VHS, like CD, like cassettes, you can't divorce the manufacturer from the content as easily in video games. You need to also become a content provider, and this is where most of them, with the big exception of Sony, really are going to fail. Mm-hmm. And and just as an interesting side note, and if you don't follow it, Trip Hawkins on his LinkedIn profile, because he's currently working on a book, basically a biography. That's why he's not doing interviews right now. He's been posting scans of his old diaries on there, almost on a daily or bi-daily basis.
I did not realize that.
Oh, go back and read it. It's absolutely fascinating stuff with who he was meeting, when, on which dates, and he's also adding a lot of commentary about it. I've been reading him every day. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible.
The one for today, or yesterday, as we're recording this on the 12th of April, had a list that he jotted down of licensees for the 3DO hardware, and one of them was Tandy, which I was not aware of, but it would make sense. I mean, Tandy had been burnt by their Intellivision, their branded Intellivision 10 years earlier.
And they'd also done a multimedia system, to compete with Philips and Commodore.
Exactly. And they just recently launched that. They just launched that in 92, at the end of 92. That's obviously also going to be a complete and abject failure. But the fact that they've also licensed the 3DO hardware for release shows, there is this real potential in the air. It's fun stuff. But yeah, if you follow him on LinkedIn, I'll put a link to his profile in the show notes. It is a fun read. He's been doing it for a while. He's jumping back and forth between the launch of EA, which is also happening at this point, and then 10 years later, the launch of 3DO. So, fun stuff.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm trying to remember. I mean, I know I don't have to be, but I'm trying to remember if I'm a first-party connection with... No, I have not linked with Trip. I am only a second-party connection.
Yeah, no, I linked up with him asking for an interview about a year or so ago, and he very, very politely said he wasn't doing interviews for podcasts because he was currently working on a book. Yeah, and that's what's happening now.
I have interviewed him twice before the period of time when he went silent to write a book.
Yeah, I postponed that interview, and I mentioned it on the show before. I postponed it originally because I wasn't sure if I really had anything new to go to ask him that he hasn't covered in a dozen other ones. And you've also mentioned how most of the time he has very rote responses for certain things. I think you've joked once that if you asked him what he had for breakfast, he'd start off first with the entire history of how he came up with the idea for EA, and then finally tell you that he had toast.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, but I do think I do now understand enough about the business that I think I'd have some very interesting questions about the marketing channels, especially in the early EA concepts. And now that he's published a lot of his notes, and you see who he was meeting with, and he highlights them with, and we were actually talking about this, and then he met with, who was the big software distributor back in the early 80s? The company SoftCell. He actually met with SoftCell, and he actually talks about how he, was trying to figure out how they were doing it so he could replicate it for EA and stuff. So those were actually the types of questions I was going to ask him. So,
yeah, no, that's wonderful. And he is a good interview. I mean, I joke about how set he is in his story, but he's willing to talk for an extended period, and he's willing to be quite candid. So, I mean, he is a good interview. It's just he definitely has some of his set narratives because he's done this so many times.
Well, and this is why so many people have interviewed him so well that I didn't know what to do. But once I figured out I haven't heard him really talk in detail about those aspects, that's when I was like, oh, I need it now. I was prepared for the interview. Yeah. And then he was like, no, I'm not doing them anymore. I was like, damn it.
Yeah, no, you have to find the angle because, another one I like to cite is, Nolan Bushnell, of course, has been interviewed tons and tons and has some of his set narratives too. But in one of my interviews with him, I also interviewed him twice. I was able to occasionally go down a path that wasn't trodden. So, talking about, coin-op distribution at one point, he's talking about how, there were two ways to get into Italy, like the legal way and the not so legal way. And it's like, it's just a little aside, but it's like, I learned a little bit about getting coin-op into Italy, which is not something that, generally comes up in interviews with Nolan Bushnell. So, yeah, if you can find the right questions for these guys, sometimes you can get a little nugget of something that's new and interesting.
I'm glad you mentioned it because we will be talking about coin-op in Italy today. But let's get back to that.
That's right. Let's get back to all these exciting new technologies. It's not just about the multimedia because VR is coming from Sega.
The buzzword for the first half of the 90s, virtual reality, looks to be coming home. Sega has announced that they will be showing off a VR headset at Summer CES for shipment by Christmas.
Outlook not so good. But they made an honest go of it. They found a company called Ono Sendai that had come up with a relatively cheap method of doing head tracking that involved LEDs and the Earth's own magnetic field, amongst other things. There's a patent for it. And they were going to give this a serious go. They thought they had the price right, but they discovered the same thing that Nintendo discovered when they ended up neutering the Virtual Boy, is that there are safety concerns, there are motion sickness and nausea concerns, and as they tested this thing, they found people were getting sick, and I don't have a lot of inside info, but that's what the word on the street is basically the tests went absolutely horrible because of the motion tracking was making people ill. And so they could have just decided, well, let's just mount it on a stand then and then have people peer into it. But cooler heads prevailed on this one. This is one time where Sega did not get sucked into peripheral hell and let Nintendo make all the poor choices instead.
Well, Atari is going to do the same thing, yes. And we've already talked about how they've hinted at a VR system for the Jaguar, which isn't out yet. And Leonard Trammell has also confirmed in my interview with him that, yeah, it basically just made you feel sick and it wasn't working. Now, they're not the only ones because at the Acme Arcade Show, that's another show for the coin-op industry, there's also a lot of VR hints going on. It's not just for the home. We got Namco, Konami, and Sega all talking about VR in the arcades. They're all working on some kind of tech. And then there's a new company called VR8. Now, I've tracked down the spokesperson for this, is an Australian developer. He is actually named in some of the articles. And turns out that he also, he's been embroiled in some scandals and it's hard to get a hold of him nowadays. Yeah, there's actually, he ended up suing a television station for running a piece on him, calling him a scammer, because he kept not paying rent on buildings and was running a couple of different big video game projects. He started off doing very, very low-end, almost public domain type games for the Amiga that didn't get any wide distribution and stuff. But there's a game called Virtual Kombat, and from the flyers for it, and I put a link to the flyer and to a picture of the cabinet. It's a normal video game cabinet, and then hanging down off of a jutting out section are these goggles that you put on your head. And from the screenshots, it really just looks like it's, a horizon moving with some sprite scaling of trees and stuff coming at you as you're supposedly in a tank, moving around, blowing stuff up. So I can't imagine that it was a really great thing, but this guy, Kyle Hodgett, got into some issues. They ran a piece about him being a scammer. I'll put links to those articles in the show notes as well. And after that, one of his complaints was that he couldn't go on social media anymore because people were after him, and he was trying to make some game that was like it looked like The Sims, but more global or something. And he was going to be selling virtual real estate in the game. It's one of those scams. And the website, the game never seems to have materialized. And so now, as far as I can tell, there's still a LinkedIn profile for him. I sent him a message, didn't hear back. But so this is where that story ends, unfortunately. But they apparently had the actual device up and running at Acme. So,
very interesting.
Yeah.
But Carl, it's time to get away from this pie in the sky nonsense. Okay, let's get to something that actually was released, was actually a hit, was actually a big deal. Because, Carl, we have word that Acclaim gets Mortal Kombat!
Oh, yes. Acclaim has announced that they will be publishing home ports of the Midway hit Mortal Kombat. No details were available at the Winter CES, but the Super NES version will arrive first, followed by Genesis and Sega CD ports.
Though, of course, they get far more ambitious than that.
Oh, yes.
Because while the Sega CD port does come later, they decide to release the Genesis, the SNES, the Game Gear, and the Game Boy all on the same day. Worldwide Mortal Monday, never been done before.
It's huge. Anybody who has listened to my interviews with the co-founder of Acclaim, oh crap, what's his name again?
Greg Fishback.
Yes, Greg Fishback. You'll know that this was a huge deal. This was marketing 101. 101. This was marketing super advanced course. And it does create a phenomenon. Would Mortal Kombat have been the centerpiece of the congressional scandals that we will be dealing with in the hearings without Mortal Monday? Probably not.
Yeah, maybe not.
But Mortal Monday is going to make it a huge deal. More importantly, of course, is that Probe Software, responsible for the Genesis and Sega CD ports, as well as I believe the Game Gear port, will also be porting it to the Amiga in a very, very good port that I still own a box copy of. I mean, now, this is as good as you were going to get on a machine from 1985. Really, really good.
I was always more of a Street Fighter II man myself, though, of course, I was not having to play these games on the Amiga.
I had both of them. I still have box copies of both of them. I'm not saying that I preferred one or the other. I was an equal person. And they're also going to do the same for Mortal Kombat 2. Mortal Kombat 2 on the Amiga actually somewhat functions. So,
somewhat. That is the backs of the the front of the box blurb right there. Somewhat functions.
No.
Carl Kuros,
the worst
Video
part
Game
is
Newsroom Time Machine.
No. The graphics are excellent. The speed of the game is great. All the moves are in there. On Mortal Kombat 1, they even have all the video sequences from the track mode. The only thing that's holding it back is the one button control. That really holds it back because you have to do these weird combinations to pull off the moves.
Yeah.
But other than that, speed, all the bonuses, all the extras, everything's in this game. It's brilliant.
But other than the controls, how did you like the play, Mr. Lincoln?
So sadly true. And had I had an alternative, I probably would agree with that statement. But I made do. Sub-Zero was still fun to play on all those, on all versions. Okay.
Moving on out of the console world into the computer world. We're going to start here with Microprose moves on to Mac.
Microprose seems to be readying a full-blown onslaught on the Mac market. While some products have been ported to the Mac previously, the move makes sense given the ever-increasing role of mouse-controlled games in the company's lineup, and Bill Steely's comments a few months ago about how going after owners of expensive hardware helps ensure sales.
Now, you haven't interviewed Wild Bill yet, have you?
Yes, I have. Oh, yeah.
Okay, you have. I couldn't remember.
Oh, yeah.
Wild Bill is a hoot and a half. That is one of the most fun interviews I have ever done. And there's not much to say. It's the Mac. Who cares? So I'm just going to focus instead on Wild Bill Steely here for a second. Sorry, Mac fans.
Yeah.
Like 4% of the market. Deal with it. The two things that stand out. First of all, we had to do it in two parts. It was all on the same day, but I had to leave briefly because I had to go pick up my wife at the time. And so, I said, can we come back later? And I was like, yeah, sure. And, I got on later and was like, thank you so much. I had to go pick up my wife. And he said, well, if you don't, somebody else is gonna.
Yeah. Oh, there were so many of those. Oh, my God.
And the other thing.
I had to cut so much out of that interview. That was just amazing stories. I mean, the only person who gave me better stories was Joe Morici of Capcom. And after we're done recording, I'll tell you some of those. But
absolutely.
I mean, both of those guys, absolute characters, wonderful. Bill Steely, really placed in my heart. I mean, very, very personable guy. Told me also the tragicness that's going to happen this year. Basically, this is the kind of the end of Microprose this year.
Yeah, and
this move to the Mac is one of those, almost desperation moves at this point because they Christmas was not good to them. And they're also having a problem figuring out, where to go. The Rex Nebular was their attempt to move into point-and-click adventures is not going to succeed, and so forth. I mean, the company is really hurting, but it is kind of interesting because Apple. I mean, this month's Byte magazine has a big thing on Apple. They've just announced 6 new models. They're trying to finally, change the image of the Mac. So they got 6 new models that they showed off at a February show, including the first color Macintosh and the classic integrated monitor model. And, of course, the color that was called the Color Classic. But the problem is it's still retailing for $1,300 at a time when, you can pick up a 486, a low-end 486 for the same price. You're not, you don't have to deal with that stupid little integrated monitor. And, well, there's a little thing called Doom right around the corner that's going to really, really screw with you. But it is interesting.
Yeah, but let's just say that at this moment, John Scully is still CEO at Apple. By the time we finish 1993 in the time machine, John Scully will no longer be CEO of Apple. So, nice try, guys. But yeah, I mean, they are making the attempt. Because they are hurting, and they're getting a little desperate too. Just like Microprose is getting a little desperate, Apple's starting to get a little desperate as well, and that's not going to go well. One final Wild Bill Steely interview story, though, that I have to tell you before we cut away. The first part of the interview we did while he was driving around, and I don't know which, he either got into a fender bender or witnessed a fender bender in the middle of our interview, didn't miss a beat, kept the interview going the whole time. The only reason I know that something happened is at one point he had to roll down his window to talk to like a police officer or something about what happened. Didn't miss a beat in the interview. And he may not have been involved in the accident. He may have just been a witness. I'm not sure. But it's like you wouldn't have even known. Tone of voice didn't change. This guy's a pilot. Cool under pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was amazing. I loved it. His ability to put you in that place. Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine what he was like back in the day when he was really in his super prime, talking to retailers, talking to distributors, being like, okay, this is what this game is going to do. This is what this product's going to do for you. That salesman pitch with the bravado of the pilot must have been something amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. But moving along across the pond, the Brits go gaga for the 486.
An unexpected uptick in demand for Intel's 486 chips has caused a shortage in Europe. According to Nick Wood, Intel's technical marketing manager at Intel UK, a significant change in demand happened in the fourth quarter of 1992. Intel saw a record fourth quarter revenue of $1.86 billion and profit of $429 million, up from just $189 million for the same quarter in 1991. Intel says that its volume processor for 1993 would be the 486 and not the Pentium.
I don't have great insights into what was going on in the British market here, but I do imagine it's the continuation of this trend and this hype surrounding multimedia, surrounding CD-ROM, which we saw in all the games being released at or previewed at CES. Because, of course, for all of that fancy multimedia stuff, you also need a fairly top-of-the-line machine for it all to run. So I think we're just seeing that that kind of uptick in the idea of people wanting higher-end PCs. I mean, I realize 486 at this point is not the high-end, it's the Pentium. But still, we're getting to that point where people want a lot of power in their home PCs for multimedia applications and stuff like that.
There's also an additional factor going on in the UK, and we've talked about this over the last couple years on the show, how the percentage of the market that belonged to the Amiga and the Atari ST just 2 years earlier dwarfed the PC market, and both Commodore and Atari dropped out of the market almost completely the year before. And the Commodore Amiga has basically just nosedived. Amstrad has ceased production of the CPC. The Sinclair Spectrum is basically on life support and still being sold in small quantities by Amstrad that has owned them for years. And the new Amigas, the Amiga 1200, has not taken off. It has collapsed. So all those people who were waiting for a new machine are now jumping on, and they're not willing to wait around for a 386. And I think this is what's catching everybody by surprise. They did not expect the home computer users to suddenly jump ship, but it's the dawn of Wolfenstein. Wolfenstein and Wing Commander. As somebody who was in Europe at this time, watching those two games, in Germany, one of the big ones that's going to push people is Day of the Tentacle. Because that's the first LucasArts point-and-click game that's not going to get ported to the Amiga. And it's just like, no, we want to play this. And yeah, it's this is what we're seeing. I think a huge chunk of this is that move.
Nope, absolutely.
Yeah. It would be borne out by the numbers. Like I said, if everybody goes back last year, we were talking about the numbers in the UK, and the Amiga still had a massive percentage of the home computer market, and it's just gone now, just overnight.
Absolutely. Intel is the new king, but that does not mean that AMD and Cyrix are not optimistic.
Oh yeah, at the Technologic Partners Personal Computer Outlook Conference. Great name. Intel's smaller rivals, AMD and Cyrix put on a brave face while arguing that Intel's massive Intel Inside campaign would not affect them as consumers, only cared that the chips they bought were 100% compatible and perform well.
Cue the laugh track.
Exactly. Well,
I mean, they have to say it. They have to say it. I mean, what else are they going to say? We're doomed. People stop buying our processors because we won't be around in 6 months. I mean, yeah, of course they have to put on a brave face, and obviously AMD is still with us today. But yeah, you know, I mean, I remember those Intel Inside commercials, and like this was definitely more than any other period. This was a period of time when the general public just associated processors with Intel. I mean, because of that massive marketing blitz with Intel Inside. Dun, 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 dun.
Exactly. And it was really innovative because up until that point, the Commodore 64 sold millions and millions and millions of units, but nobody could have told you what the CPU inside it was.
Right.
Nobody would have been able to really tell you what was inside of a PC, or a Macintosh has a Motorola in it. You know, what the hell is a Motorola at this point? A few years later, everybody would be like, oh, you mean it's got a phone inside of it? But at this point, who the hell knew what Motorola was as a brand? And so this awareness that there's a chip inside and it's made by a company called Intel was huge.
Mm-hmm. No, and I mean, when we were, because we had not upgraded computers for a while. We got, I'm pretty sure it was a 286. I don't think it was a 386, but we got a 286 PC was our first PC. So we had in the early 80s, we had a totally, absolutely legitimate and perfectly reasonably licensed, I promise you, South Korean Apple II clone that we got when we were in Korea. And then when we moved back to the States, when we moved to Hawaii, we bought what was then a fairly state-of-the-art computer circa 1986 or so. I can't remember at this point whether it was a 286 or 386 processor, but it was a decent computer for that time. And then we did not upgrade again for like 8 years. Our computer, I didn't play many computer games at that time until the mid-90s because we didn't have that great a game-playing machine. It was mostly on console. But then when it came time to upgrade, I mean, you know, we knew when we were upgrading that we needed to get one of them, you know, Pentium computers. And I mean, my parents were, my dad is not like a technophile, but he wasn't a tech rube either. He's not like, I heard on the radio there was this Pentium processor. I mean, it's not like we were, suckered into it. I mean, it was the best thing for us to get at that time, but it's just like we knew that, you know, the overriding thing is we need to get an Intel Pentium computer. And, you know, we picked, we did Micron as the company we did, which did pretty good computers back then. But, you know, the company of the PC compatible, that wasn't the important thing, whether it was Micron or Gateway or Dell or Packard Bell or whatever. No, the important thing is we had to make sure we got an Intel Pentium processor in there. I mean, you know, that awareness was built by Intel in this time period.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, by holding the keys to the kingdom with their compatibility, we've talked about this also on the show recently about how, you know, they're adding more and more functionalities into the chips that they own exclusively.
Right.
And I mean, Cyrix, of course, is going to run up against this 100% compatibility wall. As soon as Quake shows up, that's going to be the end of Cyrix. So, you know, it is interesting to see how this world of computing is getting narrower and narrower and narrower. Mm-hmm. And again, a few months ago, we talked about how Apple is working with IBM to try to create the PowerPC chip that's going to be the rival, which is only for a little while going to be the rival, and so on and so forth. So,
absolutely. But moving away from hardware and moving back on to games, Virgin bundles up with Interplay.
Interplay has increased its available portfolio of software that it can sell on an OEM basis to hardware manufacturers looking to up the value added of devices like CD-ROM drives by signing up Virgin Games' library of titles. This will mean that games like Monopoly Deluxe and The Legend of Carandia may soon appear alongside Battle Chess and those CD-ROM sleeves that dominated the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, we already kind of talked about this, so, up above, so I won't belabor it again, but you can't underestimate how important OEM sales of CD-ROM games were to game publishers. And just another example that we haven't mentioned here, everyone knows that Myst was for years the best-selling computer game of all time with 6 million in sales, and a lot of that was OEM bundling. A lot of that was people that got it with their computer, put it in maybe once, and then never played it again. Sorry, Myst fans. But, I mean, if you could get your game into an OEM bundle with these newfangled CD-ROMs that were being pushed so heavily as part of this multimedia revolution that you did not want to be left behind in, that was a super huge deal and could be a great, steady revenue stream, at least for just a couple of years here when this was a big deal.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, they were just insane, the quantities of these discs that were out there. And obviously, virtually nobody played them. I mean, it was like game licenses sold in some bundle online that what's that website that does the bundles for charity purposes again?
Oh, Humble Bundle.
Humble Bundle, yeah. I mean, I have no idea how many licenses I have acquired through that over the years that I've never even bothered to activate, stuff in my Steam library that will never ever get installed. But in theory, they sold another license,
Exactly. And Virgin and Interplay were neighbors. Virgin's American branch. They were both in Orange County near, same with Blizzard, which, of course, Interplay originally published. So this is kind of the Orange County video game mafia getting together here to make some money. Speaking of games and things changing, CGW starts the patch file.
With the increasing need to patch PC games after launch and the ability to do so through bulletin boards, Computer Gaming World has started the Patch File, a department listing all the latest patches available that month.
Yep, the days of just buying a game and being done with it are pretty much over. It accelerates with the internet, obviously, but even in this time period, patches come out, patch discs are released that you can send in for. It's a brave new world. Games are never finished anymore. They're only released into the wild.
Well, and I mean, considering how quickly the hardware is changing on the PC, how many new hardware configurations are coming out, and the fact that the operating systems are also getting patched, which can cause additional problems. I mean, it's just kind of an inevitability, it feels like.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a period where configuration is so confusing. If you did not grow up trying to play computer games in the 90s, you don't know. Back in my day, we walked uphill both ways to the computer store in the snow, and then when we brought the game home, it wouldn't run until we edited auto exec bat and config sys and created a booting disk. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus, yes.
And, IRQ hell. If you never had to live through IRQ hell, bless you. Bless you. Windows 95. Such a good thing to come along.
All I have to say is, thank goodness my first PC compatible was a Windows 95 Pentium machine. So I missed out on almost all of it. The Amiga was basically slide that disc in, turn on the power, and it automatically loads.
Nope. Yeah. No. I did a lot of DOS gaming back in the day. Of course, I already told you about my Wing Commander travails with the speed. But yeah, every day game you got, you had to make a boot disk, and even once you made the boot disk, you usually had to go in and make your own hand edits to config sys and auto exec bat, because it was all about the available memory and freeing enough memory. So I'd go in and I'd be like, okay, well, this game doesn't use the mouse. So on the line where it's loading the mouse driver, put that little REM, which stood for remove, in front of it, which stops it from loading. So, it's still in there if you need to bring it back, but it won't load. It's like, okay, we'll stop the mouse from loading, stop this from loading, see how much memory we freed up. And then, getting sound cards to work with choosing the port and the IRQ. Always an incredible adventure. Beating the game wasn't beating the game. Beating the game was just running it for the first time. That was victory. But moving on, HD TV delayed, but software industry stands at the ready.
Byte Magazine reports that the first HD TVs on the U.S. market are unlikely to appear before 1995, but at a December conference in London, the potential of the tech was palpable. In addition to higher resolutions of 1920 by 1035 pixels, the devices could have enough computing power to handle many interactive features, and the higher resolutions would make text display much easier. Connecting these still very expensive screens, $4,000 for a 32-inch model, to a computer could also become something of a boon to computer users.
I mean, I agree with that last. Not right now with my current setup, but there have been times where I've had my computer hooked up to my HD TV and used it as a monitor and for games, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But obviously HD's coming. It's not here yet, but boy, will it get there.
Yeah, and it's not going to be by 1995. That's for damn sure.
No, we got a ways to go. It was one of those technologies that was always just around the corner until suddenly it wasn't. Because I even have seen blurbs in periodicals from the 80s. The early 80s talking about how HD TV's on the way.
We just had one a couple months ago on the 40-year jump. Where
we did.
Talking about HD TV, it's coming. It's just around the corner. But it was going to take another 25 years for it to really hit home.
But speaking of things that seem to be just around the corner for a long time, FTC considers breaking up Microsoft.
Business Week reports that the Federal Trade Commission has finished its investigation of Microsoft's business practices and has found that it did, in fact, engage in anti-competitive practices. The recommendations may include breaking the company up or at least putting a quote, wall, unquote, between the operating system and application divisions to prevent the app developers from having an unfair market advantage by getting early access to new versions of the operating system.
If you think that's bad, FTC, wait till we get to the wonderful world of web browsers.
Exactly. And this perspective of realizing, because, I remember reading about this at the time, but later on the web browser thing completely overshadows it.
Yep.
But it's important to realize how far back these investigations into the monopolistic overreach abilities of an operating system monopoly really are, and how the government was already looking at it back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, there was a time in the 1980s where when you wanted a database, you went to Ashton Tate. When you wanted a spreadsheet, you went to Lotus Corporation and Lotus 123. And if you wanted a word processor, you went to WordPerfect. And then those times were completely erased by, if you need any of these things, you get Microsoft Office. And of course, they were taking advantage of the fact that they had an intimate and close understanding of the operating system to make sure that that Office suite of products ran better and more efficiently on Windows computers than competitor software did. They truly did take advantage of their insider knowledge of the OS to steal market share. So there was a legitimate concern there worth investigating.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, it's only going to get worse as the years go by and more features get integrated into the operating system. It's only really once the web hits that, well, now we can just do it in the browser. Ooh, now we have no reason to worry about this. I mean, we're looking at notes right now that are on a Google Doc that we're both looking at through our browsers.
Exactly. Now it's Google's turn to be under the monopoly microscope.
Yeah, but we've made sure in the meantime that monopoly laws really don't apply to anybody, so who cares?
Right. But it's interesting, and I'm not making any kind of political statement at all on this, but I'm just making an observation with no political agenda behind it. The interesting thing about tech is that it's different than something like, a U.S. Steel or a Standard Oil, because while a company can completely dominate an ecosystem in a period of time, at least so far with the way tech is developed and the way Silicon Valley and venture capital and all that is developed, with the way technology moves, just because you're dominating today doesn't mean that you're going to dominate in 10 years. Whereas, Standard Oil or AT&T or some of the other monopolies that had to be broken up, like no one was ever going to disrupt some of those industries without government help. And I'm not making a political statement. I'm not saying that the government should stay out of big tech. I'm not saying that there's never a situation where a monopoly shouldn't be investigated and broken up. And I certainly agree that we've gotten to some kind of crazy point where, like, monopolies, who cares? It's just a board game anyway. But it is interesting that it's harder to stay dominant in tech because the Wintel Alliance looked unbeatable, 20 years ago. And now there are cracks in that. I mean, Intel and Microsoft are still doing just fine, but it's not the same level. Or, look in video games. I mean, Nintendo had an absolute monopoly in the 1980s, and Sony had an absolute monopoly in the late 90s, early 2000s. But, as tech cycles, progress, new ways of thinking and new modes come in. So, it's just an interesting dynamic. Again, with no political statement, I'm not saying that government should stay the heck out of tech. That's not the point of that statement.
No, I completely understand, and I agree. This stuff moves so fast that the cycles that you would have seen maybe in other industries that would have taken decades are happening literally sometimes within months. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the big changes that hasn't quite happened at this point in time in the 90s yet is the massive financial war chests.
Yes.
And the ability to simply buy up all comers hadn't happened quite yet. I mean, we're on the cusp of that with the mass adoption of PCs, the mass upgrade cycle, the revenue that's going to come from the internet allowing for e-commerce and so forth. Mm-hmm. That's going to change. I mean, it would have been unthinkable for Microsoft to suddenly say, you know what, we're just going to drop a few $1 billion in cash on ChatGPT.
Right.
Maybe make Bing slightly less dumb.
Absolutely.
Obviously, that's going to fail miserably because ChatGPT is dumb as dog shit. But, just ask the Australian mayor who was accused of bribery, even though he was the whistleblower in the bribery case.
I mean, it may be dumb as dog shit, but it's probably still smarter than Bing. Hey-o!
Oh, this show just got delisted from that search
Oh,
engine.
No. We love you, Big Tech. Love us back. It's okay.
Yeah. But... oh, well.
Moving on, back across the pond again. New European law hits pirates.
The new European directive expanding protection for computer software has produced first fruits, as Italian police have raided Electronic Games and Lombarda Dioccia, two Milan firms in the business of selling counterfeit PCBs. The move comes after a complaint filed by Midway over counterfeit Mortal Kombat boards being sold. Electronic Games, owned by Paolo Di Nuno, would rename itself in the mid-90s and is still active today in the field of gambling machines.
As I mentioned in my Nolan Bushnell anecdote, it was true in the 70s, it was true in the 90s. Italy is definitely the heart of European piracy and knockoff work. So it doesn't surprise me that with the new law that there would be a focus by the coin-op companies on Italy especially, because, a lot of stuff went on there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, now, because of the nature of European, what they used to call directives, nowadays they call them, there's another technical term for it, but basically the EU Parliament passes this suggested law that then the individual countries are obligated to translate and adopt into their own laws. Not every country has done it. Now, one of the biggest piracy havens in Europe at this point is Spain. They were infamous, where you could walk down, there's this big park in the middle of Madrid, with all these booths selling, old books and stuff. And they used to have booths where they literally would just have computers set up and you could buy pirated copies of every game imaginable, literally just a couple blocks away from where those same games were being made. And nobody was doing anything about it. And, so they still haven't passed the directive, even though it was supposed to go into effect in every European country on New Year's Day. They haven't even passed it through their parliament yet. And other countries have, the translations haven't been all that hot. They've tried to reformat them for the individual jurisdictions, and those have led to problematic wording. So, software industry seems to be getting ready for having to take legal action in multiple countries at the same time in order to try to get the laws activated in order to try to stamp out some of this piracy.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Bit of a pain in the butt. But going into Paolo Di Nuno, that was a fun little deep dive for a couple of days trying to read Italian newspapers and figuring out what ended up happening to him. It does look like he may have spent some time in jail, and the last hint that I got was from a few years ago where he was apparently running a cafe someplace. So...
You're just diving into all the international figures of scandal for this episode of The Time Machine, aren't you?
What can I say? There's some fun characters in this industry. What can I say?
Absolutely. And speaking of fun characters, we end, as I believe we did in our last 1993 episode, with Sonic. Not in television this time. This time, Sonic is coming to comics.
Hot on the heels of his TV debut, Sonic will be getting his own comic series from Archie Comics.
And 290 issues later, which is just unbelievable to me. I mean, I never read it. I mean, I was too old for the Sonic comic by the time that was getting started. But yeah, I mean, if you had told me an Archie Comics on Sonic was going to last for 13 years-ish, 13, 14 years, and produced 290 issues, I would have said, yeah, crazy.
Oh, no, more than 14 years. That ran until...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean 14. I can do math. I meant 23 to 24 years.
Exactly.
I forgot to carry the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 23 to 24 years, 1992 to 2016.
And build up a tremendous amount of lore outside of the games.
Mm-hmm.
Have an extremely loyal fan base, which is one of the main reasons why there's so much Sonic weird artwork on the internet today. I mean, it was for an entire generation that was like the go-to kids comic, but also, and I never read it myself, so I don't know, was it something in the writing, something in the world building that kept people coming back? Was it similar to the way that the Donald Duck comic books expanded the lore, expanded the characters in such a way beyond just, the caricature of the guy who gets easily angered, that made them such cult classics? I don't know. But this is going to take off in a way that other licensed products don't. And it would have kept going had they not pulled the license, which makes no sense. Because
it was still going strong.
Yeah. I mean, I don't understand why they did that.
I think it had to do around merchandising of the movies that they were wanting to get into. I think they probably had to end it, would be my guess. I don't know that for sure, but that would be my guess, is that in order to get to re-exploit the property. And just in case the Department of Corrections feels the need to chime in here, I know I said 1992. I realize that the cover date of the first issue is February 1993, but comic book cover dates and actual street dates bear no resemblance to each other. They're practically parallel dimensions. So even though it's a February 1993 street date, it did actually start at the very end of 1992.
Which also would have been great, because one of the favorite gifts from uncles who basically just got off the couch right before showing up to Christmas dinner is to pick up some comic books. I know I got quite a few comic books around Christmas time that way.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. That's, I think, a good place to end our episode today, which means that you have one final task, Alex. What is the word of the episode?
Well, that's easy this time. The word of the episode is most definitely CD-ROM.
Very nice. Very, very on point. I would have also accepted VR, but CD-ROM is much more of the moment. So, Alex, where can people find your fine work?
As always, you can always find me at theycreateworlds.com. The main point of attraction there is the podcast twice a month, every month since September 2015. Sane people do seasons, sane people take breaks. We are quite batshit crazy. We have not missed a publication. So that is ongoing, the 1st and 15th of every month. Available at theycreateworlds.com. Then there is, of course, also the book, They Create Worlds, the story of the people and company that shaped the video game industry, Volume 1. That is available direct from the publisher, CRC Press, and from major online retailers. Volume 2 forthcoming whenever I actually write the bloody thing.
Excellent. And everybody, remember, you can join us on Patreon, get to see the video version of the 7 Minutes in Heaven segment, as well as early access to our interview episodes. There's always 3 interviews up there that have not hit the general feed yet, including our 2-part interviews on Seattle Funplex, my former source of income as a teenager, and basically also help, keep the lights on here, and just let me know you enjoying what we do. It's $1 a month. Come on. You know you want to.
I put my money where my mouth is. Quite literally here. I'm a proud supporter, and let me tell you, for some reason you haven't listened to any of the interviews. I mean, I know they are available for free after a period of time. If you're only listening to the month by month episodes and never listened to an interview, you are really depriving yourself. Carl is one of my favorite interviewers and of video game history personalities. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on his show and he has threatened, as the lawyer he is, to sue me into oblivion if I don't endorse him. I'm not just saying it for that reason. I really think that, Carl asked I should talk to you. You are here. Yeah. I really think that you ask very insightful questions, are always looking for an angle that has not been covered before when interviewing somebody, and really focus in on some of the interesting mechanics of how the business works, which is something that's near and dear to my heart personally as a topic of interest. So if you're not listening to those interviews, do yourself a favor and start doing so. And if you can kick in a little to get them a little earlier than the rest of us, or the rest of them, because I am a supporter as well, and can lord it over them that you get the superior content early, go ahead and do that too.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was very, very, very kind of you. Okay, so you're withdrawing the lawsuit tomorrow, right? As we agreed, right? Hey. We first need to. We said as soon as the Patreon numbers go up, that's when you get it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, everybody. Have fun. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, and yada yada yada. Okay.